They started dividing the house before the flowers had wilted. My grandson laughed as he pointed toward the portrait hanging above the fireplace. "Take that one down first," he said. "It'll look better once we renovate." The funeral had ended less than 3 hours earlier. The black dresses, sympathy handshakes, and carefully rehearsed tears were already gone. In their place came measuring tapes, property discussions, and whispered arguments about who deserved what. I stood in the doorway of the living room, still wearing the same outfit I'd worn to bury my husband. No one noticed. Or perhaps they did and simply chose not to care. The house that had once echoed with family dinners and holiday music now sounded like an auction floor. Every room was filled with voices discussing furniture, jewelry, vehicles, and vacation properties. "I'm taking the lake cabin," my son announced confidently. "You can't just claim it," his daughter argued. "Watch me." Laughter followed. Not a single person mentioned my husband's name. Not a single person shared a memory. They spoke only of assets. One granddaughter walked through the dining room with a tablet, scanning walls and taking measurements. "This room would make an amazing wine lounge," she said. "After Grandma moves out," someone replied. More laughter. I remained silent. Years teach you many things. One of them is that people often reveal their true character when they think you no longer matter. My husband and I had built this home 42 years ago. I remembered carrying paint buckets through unfinished hallways. I remembered sleeping on a mattress on the floor because we couldn't afford furniture. I remembered every sacrifice. Apparently, I was the only one. By evening, colored stickers had begun appearing throughout the house. Blue stickers, yellow stickers, pink stickers. Each one marked an item someone intended to take. An antique cabinet, a grandfather clock, my favorite reading chair, even the crystal bowl my mother had given me before she passed away. They labeled everything as if I were already gone. At dinner, there wasn't a place set for me at the table. Someone eventually brought a folding chair from the garage and placed it near the kitchen entrance. The sacrifice no one ever saw. People love stories about self-made millionaires. They admire the speeches, the magazine covers, the photographs of success. They point at the person standing under the spotlight and assume that person climbed the mountain alone. What they never see are the hands pushing from behind. 15 years before my family started placing ownership stickers on my furniture, our world had been falling apart. The company was drowning. Bills piled higher every month. Contracts disappeared. Investors stopped returning calls. Every conversation in the house seemed to end with silence and worry. One winter evening, my husband walked through the front door looking 10 years older than he had that morning. He loosened his tie and sat in the dark without turning on a single light. I knew something was wrong. "What happened?" I asked. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he finally spoke. "If we can't secure financing within 30 days, it's over." The words hung in the room like smoke. Over. Not struggling. Not recovering. Finished. The business he'd spent decades building was on the verge of collapse. And with it would go our savings, our home, and the futures of everyone who depended on us. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table. I stared at a small wooden box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were pieces of my life. My mother's sapphire necklace, the gold bracelet my grandmother gave me on my wedding day, the earrings I wore when I held my newborn son for the first time. Each piece carried a memory. Each memory carried a price. By sunrise, I had made my decision. Over the next week, I quietly sold every valuable heirloom I owned. No family meetings, no announcements, no praise. I simply walked into a bank and transferred the money where it was needed most. When my husband asked where the funds had come from, I smiled and told him not to waste time asking questions. Just save the company, I said. And he did. Within months, new investors arrived. Contracts returned. The company stabilized. Then it grew, and grew, and grew. Soon, newspapers called my husband a visionary businessman. Industry leaders invited him to conferences. Business magazines published articles praising his determination and genius. I sat in the audience and applauded with everyone else. The secret hidden in the attic. The morning after my family decided I was little more than an inconvenience, I climbed the attic stairs, carrying a flashlight. Nobody followed me. Nobody ever did. For years, that dusty attic had been invisible to everyone except me. The grandchildren saw it as a storage space. My son called it a junk room. The rest of the family never bothered to go up there at all. That was exactly why I had chosen it. Behind a stack of old holiday decorations sat a weathered cedar chest. Inside were photo albums, letters, and a leather folder wrapped in a faded blue ribbon. The moment I touched it, memories rushed back. Not memories of family vacations or birthday parties. Memories of late nights, of notebooks, of calculations, of ideas. 15 years ago, after the emergency funding saved the company from bankruptcy, the business was still fragile. It had survived the storm, but it wasn't strong enough to thrive. My husband knew it. The board knew it. The investors knew it. What they didn't know was that I had been studying every financial report that crossed our dining room table. Every evening, after everyone went to sleep, I read through company statements, market forecasts, and shareholder reports. I wasn't guessing. Before marriage, I had worked in strategic planning and business development. It had been a different chapter of my life, one few people remembered, including my own family. One night, I noticed something everyone else had missed. The market was changing. Competitors were chasing short-term profits while ignoring long-term growth opportunities. I spent weeks building a strategy. Page after page. Flowcharts. Forecasts. The day everything changed. The law office was packed. Every chair around the polished conference table was occupied. My son sat closest to the attorney, wearing the confidence of a man who believed the future already belonged to him. His wife sat beside him, scrolling through luxury property listings on her phone. Across the room, my grandchildren whispered about renovations, vacations, and sports cars. None of them looked concerned. Why would they be? As far as they knew, today's meeting was a formality. A final step before the fortune was divided. I sat quietly near the end of the table. No one greeted me. No one asked if I was comfortable. In fact, the only time my son acknowledged my presence was when he leaned toward his wife and muttered, "Once this is over, we can finally move forward." I pretended not to hear. The attorney entered precisely at 10 o'clock. The conversations stopped immediately. He placed a thick folder on the table and adjusted his glasses. "Thank you all for coming," he began. We are here to review the final wishes of the late Richard Holloway. A wave of anticipation swept through the room. My grandson straightened his tie. My granddaughter locked her phone. My son folded his hands together and smiled. The attorney opened the file. For the next 20 minutes, he reviewed several routine distributions, charitable donations, business obligations, trust requirements. Everyone listened patiently. They were waiting for the important part. Finally, the attorney reached the final section. The primary estate distribution, he announced. My son's smile widened. Then the attorney looked directly at him. Before we proceed, there was an attached condition left by Mr. Holloway. The room grew still. A condition? My son asked. Yes. The attorney removed a sealed envelope. Your father instructed that this statement be read before any inheritance is distributed. Confused glances spread around the table. The envelope was opened. Inside was a handwritten letter. The attorney began reading. If my family has treated my wife with kindness, respect, and dignity after my passing, proceed as planned. The name they tried to erase. No one spoke as the attorney placed the second file on the table. The room had completely changed. Just an hour earlier, my family had arrived expecting a celebration. They had walked into the office believing they were about to inherit a fortune. Now they sat frozen in their seats, watching a stack of papers that suddenly seemed more dangerous than any amount of money. My son was the first to break the silence. "What is this?" he asked. The attorney folded his hands. "This," he replied calmly, "is the documentation connected to the strategy that transformed Holloway Enterprises from a struggling company into a multi-million-dollar corporation." My son frowned. Dad's expansion plan? The attorney looked at him. No. The single word hit harder than a shout. He opened the file and removed several documents. Original drafts. Business projections. Licensing agreements. Copyright registrations. Patent records. Every page pointed to the same conclusion. The architect behind the company's biggest breakthrough had never been Richard Holloway. It had been me. Gasps echoed around the room. My granddaughter covered her mouth. My grandson stared at the papers as though they were written in another language. My son's face drained of color. "That's impossible," he whispered. The attorney slid a certified report across the table. Handwriting analysis confirmed authorship. Legal review confirmed ownership. The intellectual property rights remain attached to Mrs. Holloway. He turned another page. The strategy continues to generate licensing revenue through multiple business partnerships. My son swallowed hard. How much? The attorney didn't hesitate. Several million.